The river glittered like shards of broken glass under the setting sun as Julianne Becker hurled her wedding ring into its flowing depths. She didn't hear the approaching footsteps behind her, nor did she notice the tall shadow that fell across the riverbank until it was there beside her own. When she finally looked up, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face, she saw him, a stranger with kind eyes and a well-worn hat, saying nothing, just standing beside her in silent solidarity. Stockton, California, 1873. The Stanislaus River was Julian's only witness that evening, or so she had thought. The water rushed over smooth stones, carrying away the gold band that had imprisoned her for 3 miserable years. 3 years of bruises hidden beneath high-necked blouses. 3 years of excuses to neighbors about her husband's temper. 3 years too many. The cowboy kept a respectful distance, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and crimson. He wasn't particularly handsome in the conventional way, his face weathered by sun and wind, a small scar cutting through his right eyebrow, but something about his presence felt safe. "I don't need your pity," Julianne said finally, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Not offering any, madam," he replied, voice low and steady as the river current. "Just thought no one should be alone at a moment like this." Julianne studied him suspiciously. His clothes were dusty from the trail but well maintained. A gun belt hung at his hip, the leather worn but cared for. "Not a drifter then, but not local either." "You're not from Stockton," she stated. "No, madam, name's Ethan Winters, passing through on my way north. Julianne Becker." She hesitated before adding, "Just Becker now, I suppose." Ethan nodded, not pressing for details. The silence between them was strangely comforting as the light faded from the sky. "You got somewhere to go tonight, Mrs. Becker?" he asked eventually. "Just Miss Becker," she corrected him firmly. "And yes, my sister's place. It's not far." A lie. Her sister lived in Sacramento, and Julianne had nowhere to go. Frank would be looking for her by now, his rage building with every passing minute. Ethan seemed to sense the falsehood but didn't call her on it. "There's a decent boarding house in town, Mrs. Sullivan's place. Tell her Ethan sent you and she'll give you a fair price." "I don't need your help," Julianne said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Everyone needs help sometimes, Miss Becker." He tipped his hat. "Evening to you." Ethan started walking back toward town, his spurs jingling softly with each step. Julianne watched him go, wondering how a stranger could show more kindness in 5 minutes than her husband had in 3 years. The night was growing cold. Reluctantly, she gathered her small satchel, all she had managed to take from the house, while Frank was at the saloon, and followed the cowboy's path toward Stockton. Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house sat on a quiet side street, its whitewashed facade welcoming despite the lateness of the hour. A plump woman with silver-streaked hair answered Julianne's tentative knock. "We're full up," she began, then paused, taking in Julianne's tear-stained face. "You all right, dear?" "Ethan Winters sent me," Julianne said, the words feeling strange on her tongue. "He said you might have a room, Mrs." Sullivan's expression softened immediately. "Any friend of Ethan's is welcome here. I do have a small room at the back. It's not much, but it's clean." The room was indeed small, with just a narrow bed, a washstand, and a hook for clothing. But to Julianne it felt like a palace, a place where Frank couldn't reach her. She sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to breathe. The following morning, Julianne woke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains. For a disorienting moment, she expected to hear Frank's heavy footsteps, his demands for breakfast. Instead, there was only the distant clatter of dishes and muffled voices from downstairs. After washing her face and pinning her dark hair into a simple bun, she made her way to the boarding house's small dining room. Several people sat at the communal table, including Ethan Winters, who nodded to her as Mrs. Sullivan ushered her to an empty seat. "Sleep well, dear, Mrs. Sullivan asked, placing a plate of eggs and toast before her. "Better than I have in years," Julian admitted. Breakfast conversation flowed around her talk of cattle prices, the railroad's progress, and local gossip. Julian ate quietly, aware of Ethan's occasional glance, but grateful he made no effort to engage her directly. As the other boarders dispersed to their daily activities, Mrs. Sullivan approached Julian with a pot of coffee. "More, dear." "No, thank you. I should be going." Going where, she wasn't certain. "Before you do," Mrs. Sullivan said, lowering her voice, "I should tell you that Frank Becker was asking questions at the saloon last night, looking for his wife." Julian's hands began to tremble. "How did you know? Stockton's not so big a place that I don't know who's married to whom," the older woman replied. "And those bruises you're hiding under your collar tell me plenty." Shame burned in Julian's cheeks, but Mrs. Sullivan patted her hand gently. "No need for that, dear. You're not the first woman to find herself in such circumstances." From the doorway, Ethan's voice interrupted them. "Miss Becker, if you're looking for work, Harvey Miller needs help at his general store. His daughter's just had a baby and moved to Modesto." Julian looked up, surprised both by his presence and his offer. "I don't know anything about running a store. You can count and speak politely to customers, I assume." At her nod, he continued, "That's all Harvey needs. He's a fair man." An hour later, Julian stood behind the counter of Miller's general store, listening carefully as Harvey Miller, a balding man with kind eyes, explained the pricing system and inventory. "It's simple enough," he assured her. "And I'll be here most days, except Wednesdays when I go to pick up supplies from the warehouse in Lodi." The work was indeed straightforward, and Julian found herself enjoying the routine of helping customers, restocking shelves, and keeping the ledger. By the end of the day, her feet ached and her back was stiff, but she felt something she hadn't in years, a sense of purpose, of independence. Harvey paid her a fair wage for the day's work and asked her to return tomorrow. With money in her pocket, Julian walked back to the boarding house, alert for any sign of Frank, but the streets remained peaceful as dusk settled over Stockton. At dinner that night, Ethan sat across from her at the boarding house table. He didn't mention the store, and Julian was grateful for his discretion. "Will you be staying in Stockton long, Mr. Winters?" asked Mr. Peterson, an elderly gentleman who lived permanently at the boarding house. "A week or two," Ethan replied. "Got some business to attend to before heading north." "What kind of business brings you to our little corner of California?" Mrs. Sullivan inquired as she served a steaming apple pie. "Cattle. Looking to buy a small herd to take back to my place near Sacramento." Julian listened with interest. So he wasn't just passing through as he'd implied. After dinner, she found herself alone with Ethan on the small porch that wrapped around the boarding house. The evening was mild, stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue sky. "Thank you," she said simply. "For the job. For not asking questions." Ethan leaned against the porch railing. "Everyone's entitled to their privacy, Miss Becker. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." He was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant silhouette of oak trees. "My sister was married to a man like I suspect your husband is. No one helped her when she needed it most." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Julian felt a connection to this stranger that defied explanation. "What happened to her?" she asked softly. "She's in Sacramento now. Runs a dressmaking shop. Took her 3 tries to leave him before it stuck." He turned to face her directly. "It's not easy starting over." "No," Julian agreed. "It's not." They stood in companionable silence until Mrs. Sullivan called them in for the night, warning of a chill in the air that neither of them had noticed. The next morning at the general store, Julian was arranging a display of canned goods when the bell above the door jangled. She looked up with a smile that died instantly on her lips. Frank Becker filled the doorway, his broad shoulders tense, dark eyes scanning the store until they landed on her. He was handsome in the conventional way that had first attracted her strong jaw, confident posture, but now she saw only the cruelty lurking beneath. "There you are," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "I've been looking everywhere for you, Jules." Harvey was in the storeroom, out of earshot. Julian stood frozen behind the counter, the tin of peaches in her hand suddenly heavy. "You need to come home now," Frank continued, moving closer. "You've had your little tantrum." "I'm not coming back, Frank." His expression hardened. "Don't be foolish. Where will you go? What will you do? You're my wife." "Not anymore," Julian replied, surprised at the steadiness in her voice. "I threw my ring in the river. I'm done." Frank's face darkened with anger. He reached across the counter, grabbing her wrist with bruising force. "You're making a scene. We'll discuss this at home." "Let go of me." Julian tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Is there a problem here?" Ethan's voice cut through the tension as he stepped into the store, the bell announcing his arrival. Frank turned, not releasing Julian. "This is between me and my wife, stranger. Best move along." Ethan's stance shifted subtly, his hand resting casually near his holstered gun. "The lady doesn't seem to want to go with you." "She's my wife," Frank repeated, his voice rising. "This isn't your concern." "I believe the lady made her position clear when she threw her ring in the river," Ethan said mildly. Frank's face registered shock before contorting with rage. "You've been seeing this cowboy." "Is that it, Jules? Running around behind my back?" "No, Frank, it's not." Before she could finish, Frank released her wrist and lunged toward Ethan. But Ethan was quicker, sidestepping the charge and delivering a sharp blow to Frank's midsection that doubled him over. "I don't want trouble," Ethan said, his voice still calm despite the confrontation. "But Miss Becker has made her choice. I suggest you respect it." Harvey emerged from the storeroom, alarmed by the commotion. "What's happening here?" "Frank Becker, are you causing trouble in my store?" Frank straightened, his breathing heavy, eyes darting between Julian, Ethan, and Harvey. "This isn't over," he spat before storming out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled in its frame. In the silence that followed, Julian realized she was trembling. Harvey looked bewildered, but Ethan's expression was grim. "He'll be back," Ethan said quietly, "and likely with friends." "I should leave Stockton," Julian said, rubbing her wrist where red marks were already forming. "I don't want to bring trouble to anyone." "Running won't solve it," Ethan replied. "Men like him, they don't give up easy." Harvey cleared his throat. "Frank's got a temper, that's known around town, but he's got friends at the saloon and his logging business gives work to a lot of men." "I'll go to Sacramento," Julian decided. "My sister's there. I should have gone directly to her, but I was ashamed." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "I'm heading that way myself in a few days, after I conclude my business here. You don't need to escort me, Mr. Winters. I've imposed on your kindness enough." "It's no imposition. The roads can be dangerous for a woman traveling alone." Harvey Miller looked between them with concern. "Julian, perhaps it would be wiser to reconcile with Frank. Marriage has its difficulties, but—" "No," she interrupted firmly. "I won't go back to him. Not ever." The remainder of the day passed tensely, with Julian jumping at every ring of the bell. Ethan stayed nearby, ostensibly browsing the store's merchandise while keeping watch. By closing time, there had been no sign of Frank, which worried Julian more than if he had returned immediately. As they walked back to the boarding house together, The streets of Stockton were alive with early evening activity, men leaving work, children playing, women chatting on porches. Julianne felt exposed, aware of curious glances from townspeople who surely knew of her confrontation with Frank by now. "News travels fast in small towns," Ethan commented, seeming to read her thoughts. "I never wanted to be the subject of gossip," Julianne sighed. "I just wanted to be free of him." Sometimes freedom comes at a cost. At the boarding house, Mrs. Sullivan was waiting anxiously. "I heard what happened," she said, ushering them inside. "Frank's at the saloon, drinking heavily and talking loudly about his unfaithful wife." "I never," Julianne began indignantly. "Of course you didn't, dear," Mrs. Sullivan assured her, "but Frank needs to save face somehow." Dinner was a somber affair, with the other boarders casting sympathetic glances at Julianne. She barely touched her food, her appetite gone. Afterward, she excused herself to her room, needing solitude to think. She was folding her few belongings into her satchel when a soft knock came at her door. Opening it cautiously, she found Ethan standing in the hallway. "May I come in?" "Just to talk," he added quickly, seeing her hesitation. Propriety dictated she refuse, but conventional rules seemed meaningless after the day's events. She stepped aside to let him enter. Ethan remained standing, hat in hand, respecting the impropriety of their situation despite her invitation. "I've been thinking about your situation. The stage to Sacramento doesn't leave until Thursday, and it's only Monday. I know, I'll manage somehow. Frank knows you're here. It's not safe." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "I have a camp set up outside town by the river. I've been staying there most nights, just coming to the boarding house for meals." "Why tell me this?" "Because it might be safer for you there until we can leave for Sacramento. Frank wouldn't think to look for you outside of town." Julianne considered the suggestion. Staying unchaperoned with a man she barely knew went against everything she'd been taught was proper. Yet the alternative was waiting for Frank to make his next move. What would people think? She asked, though she was beginning to care less about such judgments. "They'll think what they want regardless," Ethan replied pragmatically. "Frank's already spreading rumors. Question is, what matters more, your reputation or your safety?" Put that way, the decision was simple. "When do we leave?" "Now, while it's dark and Frank's likely still at the saloon." 20 minutes later, they slipped out the back door of the boarding house with Mrs. Sullivan's blessing and a bundle of food she'd insisted on preparing. The night was moonless, providing cover as they made their way through town and toward the river. Ethan's camp was well hidden in a grove of trees near the Stanislaus, the same spot where Julianne had thrown her ring away. A small tent was set up beside a carefully constructed fire pit, currently cold and dark. A horse was tethered nearby, lifting its head at their approach. "It's not much," Ethan said, sounding almost apologetic as he started a small fire. "It's perfect," Julianne replied, feeling oddly at peace despite the circumstances. They sat by the fire, eating Mrs. Sullivan's bread and cheese, the night sounds of the river and crickets creating a peaceful backdrop. For the first time, Julianne asked about Ethan's life beyond what little he'd shared. "You mentioned a ranch near Sacramento. It's small, just starting out really. 20 acres, a cabin I built myself, and a few head of cattle. Nothing grand, but it's mine." "Why were you really in Stockton?" "It can't just be for cattle." Ethan smiled slightly. "You're observant. I came to deliver a letter to Mrs. Sullivan from my sister. They're old friends. The cattle business is real enough, though. And now you're caught up in my troubles." "I chose to be," he reminded her gently. Julianne studied his face in the firelight, seeing the kindness there, the quiet strength. In 3 days, this man had shown her more respect than Frank had in 3 years. "Tell me about your sister," she said, drawing her knees up to her chest. The one who left her husband. Ethan's expression grew serious. Elizabeth. She married young to a man who seemed charming at first. By the time I returned from the war, he had isolated her from family, from friends. It took years before she found the courage to leave. The war. Julian hadn't considered that he might be a veteran, Union cavalry, spent 3 years fighting, came home to find my sister a shadow of herself. His voice held old anger. I wanted to kill him, nearly did the last time he came for her. What stopped you, Elizabeth? She said if I killed him, I'd hang and then she'd truly be alone. He poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks into the night sky. She was right. There are better ways to fight. They talked long into the night, sharing stories of their lives. Julian told him about growing up in Ohio, coming west with her family after the war, meeting Frank, who had seemed so steady and promising. Ethan spoke of his time in the cavalry, the loss of comrades, his dream of building something peaceful after so much destruction. When Julian finally crawled into the tent to sleep on the blankets Ethan had arranged for her, she felt a strange lightness despite the danger that still loomed. Ethan stayed by the fire, keeping watch through the night. Morning arrived with birdsong and mist rising from the river. Julian emerged from the tent to find Ethan already awake, brewing coffee over a small fire. "Sleep well?" he asked, offering her a tin cup of the strong brew. "Better than I expected," she admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. They shared a simple breakfast of hardtack and dried fruit from Ethan's provisions. The day stretched before them, 3 more to wait until they could leave for Sacramento. "I should go into town," Ethan said eventually. "Check with Mrs. Sullivan, see what Frank's been doing, get more supplies." "I'll come with you. It's safer if you stay here." "And if Frank or his friends find me while you're gone," Julian countered. "No, I won't hide in the woods like a frightened animal." Ethan considered her determination and nodded. "All right, but stay close." They returned to Stockton mid-morning, the streets busy with the day's commerce. Julian kept her head high despite the stares and whispers that followed them. At the boarding house, Mrs. Sullivan greeted them with relief. "Thank goodness you're both safe." Frank was here last night demanding to search the rooms. Sheriff Thompson was with him, trying to keep him calm. "The sheriff," Julian's heart sank. "Official involvement complicated matters. Don't worry, dear. Thompson's a good man. He knows Frank's reputation, but he has to be seen enforcing the law." "What exactly is Frank claiming?" Ethan asked. Mrs. Sullivan hesitated. "That you've abducted his wife, that you two were involved before she left him." "That's absurd," Julian exclaimed. "I'd never even met Mr. Winters before the day I left Frank." "Truth matters less than perception right now," Ethan said grimly. "We should speak to the sheriff directly, set the record straight." The sheriff's office was a small building near the town center. Sheriff Thompson, a weathered man with a gray mustache and tired eyes, looked up as they entered, recognition and wariness crossing his features. "Mrs. Becker, and you must be Winters. I was wondering when you'd show up." "It's Miss Becker," Julian corrected firmly. "And I understand my husband has been making accusations." Sheriff Thompson leaned back in his chair. "Frank's claiming this man stole you away, says you've been unfaithful." "That's a lie," Julian stated flatly. "I left Frank because he beat me, regularly. I met Mr. Winters afterward by chance." The sheriff's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened slightly. "Got any proof of these beatings, Miss Becker?" Julian hesitated only a moment before unbuttoning the high collar of her blouse just enough to reveal the fading bruises on her collarbone. "These are a week old. I have older ones that haven't fully healed." Thompson sighed heavily. "I suspected as much. Frank's always had a temper." He looked at Ethan. "And your role in this, Winters? I'm helping Miss Becker reach her sister in Sacramento. Nothing more." "That's so." The sheriff's gaze was evaluating. "Because spending nights alone together, as I hear you've been doing, tends to suggest otherwise." "My reputation is a small price for my safety," Julian interjected. "Mr. Winters has been nothing but a gentleman." Sheriff Thompson drummed his fingers on his desk. "Here's how it stands. I've no legal grounds to force a wife back to her husband against her will. But Frank's got influence in this town, and he's determined to either have you back or see Winters here punished for stealing you." "What do you suggest?" Ethan asked. "Leave Stockton. Sooner than Thursday's stage, if possible. Frank's gathering men who owe him favors." "I can't be everywhere at once." As they left the sheriff's office, Julian felt a mix of relief and frustration. "So we're just supposed to run?" "Sometimes retreat is the wisest strategy," Ethan replied. "Let's get supplies and head back to camp. We'll leave at first light tomorrow." At the general store, Harvey Miller greeted Julian with concern. He offered her the wages she would have earned for the full week, despite having worked only one day. "You're a good worker, Julian. If things settle down, there's always a place for you here." Their last stop was the livery stable, where Ethan arranged to buy a gentle mare for Julian to ride to Sacramento. The liveryman, a taciturn fellow named Jenkins, accepted Ethan's money without comment but warned them as they were leaving. "Frank Becker and some loggers were asking if I'd sold any horses today. Be careful, Winters." They returned to the camp without incident, though both felt the tension of being watched as they left town. Ethan insisted they move the camp farther upstream away from its original location, in case Frank had learned of it. As they set up the new camp, Julian found herself watching Ethan the efficient way he built the fire, set up the tent, cared for the horses. There was something comforting in his competence, his quiet assurance. "You're staring, Miss Becker," he noted without looking up from his task. Julian felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I was just thinking how different you are from Frank." He was all noise and bluster, always needing to be the center of attention. Not all men need to announce their presence to feel it's acknowledged. That night, as they sat by the fire planning their journey to Sacramento, Julian felt a strange sense of anticipation rather than fear. She was leaving behind a life of pain for an uncertain future, yet she felt more hope than she had in years. "What will you do in Sacramento?" Ethan asked. "Besides staying with your sister?" "I'm not sure. Find work, I suppose." "I'm good with numbers. My father taught me to keep books for his business." "Your sister's dressmaking shop might need help with that." Julian smiled at the thought. "Perhaps. And what about you? Will you return to your ranch immediately?" Ethan poked at the fire thoughtfully. "That's the plan. The cattle I'm buying will be delivered there directly. I need to prepare for their arrival." An awkward silence fell between them, both aware that their paths would soon diverge, yet neither quite willing to acknowledge it. "I should get some sleep," Julian said finally, rising to her feet. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Ethan nodded, not meeting her eyes. "I'll wake you before dawn." Inside the tent, Julian lay awake, listening to Ethan moving around the camp, securing things for the night. She tried to imagine returning to normal life in Sacramento, perhaps working in her sister's shop, building a new existence free from fear. But every future she envisioned now contained Ethan Winters, and that confused her. She had known him less than a week. Her heart had been closed for so long, protected behind walls built of suffering and distrust. Yet somehow this quiet, steady man had slipped past those defenses without even trying. Dawn came too quickly. Ethan woke her with a gentle call from outside the tent, already having prepared coffee and a simple breakfast. They ate in silence, the weight of departure hanging between them. As they packed up the camp and saddled the horses, Julian noticed Ethan was unusually alert, his gaze constantly scanning the surrounding trees. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "Just being cautious," he replied, checking the cinch on her saddle. "The mare's name is Daisy. She's steady, won't give you any trouble." They set off as the first light of day filtered through the trees, taking a route that would keep them away from Stockton, following the river for a while before cutting northeast toward Sacramento. Julian found riding easier than she had expected, Daisy responding to the slightest guidance. They had been traveling for perhaps an hour when Ethan suddenly raised his hand, signaling for silence. He dismounted in one fluid motion, helping Julian down as well. Leading the horses behind a cluster of oak trees, he drew his pistol. "What is it?" Julian whispered. "Riders, coming fast." His expression was grim. 4, maybe 5. Before she could respond, they heard the thunder of approaching hooves. Ethan positioned himself slightly in front of Julian, his body tense. The riders appeared around a bend in the trail, Frank at the lead, with 3 men Julian recognized as workers from his logging operation. They reined in sharply at the sight of Ethan and Julian. "There she is," Frank snarled, his face flushed with anger or alcohol, possibly both. "And her lover." "Go home, Frank," Ethan said calmly, though his hand remained on his pistol. "There's no need for this to get ugly." One of Frank's companions, a burly man named Dawson, spat on the ground. "You've got some nerve, Cowboy, stealing another man's wife." "I'm not his property," Julian said, stepping forward despite Ethan's protective stance. "I left of my own free will." "Shut up, Jules," Frank snapped. "This is between men now." He dismounted, swaggering forward. "I'm taking my wife home, Winters. Stand aside or there'll be trouble." "She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go," Ethan replied, his voice still level but with steel beneath it. Frank's hand moved toward the pistol at his hip. "Last chance, Cowboy." What happened next unfolded so quickly that Julian could barely process it. Frank drew his gun, but Ethan was faster, knocking the weapon from Frank's hand with a well-placed shot. The other men reached for their weapons, but froze as Ethan's gun swung toward them. "Next one won't be aimed at your hand, Frank," Ethan warned, Frank's face contorted with fury. "You bastard, you shot me." Blood dripped from his grazed knuckles. "Be grateful that's all I shot," Ethan replied. "Now, you and your friends are going to get back on your horses and ride to Stockton. Miss Becker and I will continue our journey." For a tense moment, it seemed Frank might charge despite the gun pointed at him. Then Dawson called out, "Let it go, Frank. She ain't worth dying for." The fight seemed to drain from Frank suddenly. He looked at Julian with contempt. "You're no wife of mine. Never were much good at it anyway." The words were meant to wound, but Julian felt only relief. "Goodbye, Frank." As Frank and his men rode away, Ethan kept his gun ready until they were out of sight. Only then did he holster it, turning to Julian with concern. "Are you all right?" She nodded, surprised to find she was trembling not from fear but from a powerful sense of finality. "Yes, it's over, isn't it? With Frank, I believe so." Ethan helped her back onto Daisy, "But we should keep moving just in case." They rode hard for several hours, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch by a stream. Julian noticed Ethan wincing occasionally, favoring his left side. "You're hurt," she said as they prepared to continue their journey. "It's nothing. Old war injury acts up sometimes." "Let me see." Her tone brooked no argument. Reluctantly, Ethan lifted his shirt to reveal an old scar along his ribs, the skin around it inflamed. Julian gasped softly. "That's not nothing, Ethan. We need to rest properly." "We'll rest when we reach Sacramento," he insisted, but his face was pale beneath his tan. By late afternoon, it was clear Ethan was in significant pain, though he tried to hide it. When they came upon a small homestead, Julian insisted they ask for shelter. The family who lived there, the Andersons, a middle-aged couple with 2 teenage sons, welcomed them warmly, offering a hot meal and beds for the night when they heard a simplified version of their situation. "War veterans are always welcome at our table," Mr. Anderson said, himself missing an arm from a battle at Gettysburg. "And a lady in distress, even more so." Mrs. Anderson helped Julian prepare a poultice for Ethan's old wound, explaining that she had served as a nurse during the war. "It's inflammation, not infection," she assured Julian. "A day's rest should help considerably." That night, in the small guest room the Andersons had given her, Julian lay awake thinking about the day's events. Frank's final dismissal of her had been freeing rather than hurtful. She was no longer defined by being his wife, failed or otherwise. And then there was Ethan, sleeping in the barn at his own insistence despite the Andersons' offer of their son's room. His protective instincts, his respect for her choices, his quiet strength all had awakened feelings in her she had thought long dead. Morning brought sunshine and the smell of fresh bread. Ethan looked better after a night's rest, the color back in his face. The Andersons insisted they stay for breakfast before continuing their journey. "Sacramento's only a few hours' ride from here," Mr. Anderson told them as they ate. "You'll be there by mid-afternoon if you take the river road." As they prepared to leave, Julian embraced Mrs. Anderson. "Thank you for everything." "Be happy, dear," the older woman whispered. "You deserve it after what you've been through." The remaining journey passed quickly, the landscape gradually changing as they approached Sacramento. The city came into view just as Mr. Anderson had predicted, its buildings spreading along the Sacramento River, more extensive and bustling than Stockton. "Where does your sister live?" Ethan asked as they entered the outskirts of the city. "K Street, near the river." She wrote that her shop is called Elizabeth's Fine Sewing. Ethan's expression changed subtly at the name. "Elizabeth's, of course." Julian looked at him curiously. "What is it?" "My sister's name is Elizabeth. Elizabeth Winters Morgan now." Understanding dawned on Julian slowly. "Your sister is my sister's dressmaker. That can't be possible." "Sacramento's a growing city, but not so large that there would be 2 dressmakers named Elizabeth," Ethan said, looking as astonished as she felt. "Did your sister ever mention her dressmaker's brother? She might have." "Jane writes infrequently, and I admit I haven't been the most attentive correspondent these past years." Julian shook her head in amazement. "What are the chances?" "Fate works in mysterious ways," Ethan said, a smile spreading across his face. "I was always meant to help you reach your sister, it seems." The shop was easy to find, a tidy storefront with elegant dresses displayed in the window. As they tied their horses to the hitching post, the door opened and a woman who could only be Ethan's sister stepped out. Elizabeth Winters Morgan had the same steady gaze as her brother, though her hair was lighter and her features more delicate. "Ethan," she exclaimed in surprise. "What are you doing here? You weren't expected until next week." Before he could answer, another woman appeared in the doorway, Julian's sister Jane, her familiar face lighting up with shock and joy. "Julian, is it really you?" The next moments were a confusion of embraces, exclamations, and introductions. Jane pulled Julian inside the shop while Elizabeth hugged her brother fiercely, demanding explanations. As the initial excitement settled, they gathered in the small sitting room behind the shop. Ethan and Julian took turns explaining the events that had brought them to Sacramento, though they kept the details of Frank's abuse vague out of respect for Julian's privacy. "So you just happened to be at the river when my sister threw away her wedding ring?" Jane asked Ethan, her expression a mix of gratitude and suspicion. Pure coincidence, Ethan assured her, or perhaps providence. Elizabeth looked between her brother and Julian with a knowing smile. Well, it seems I have both of you to thank for bringing my favorite customer's sister safely to us. Customer and partner now, Jane corrected. I've been investing in Elizabeth's business, helping it grow. Which is why I need those cattle, Ethan added. Elizabeth's success means I can finally expand the ranch. As the conversation continued, it became clear that Jane and Elizabeth had built not just a business relationship, but a deep friendship. They shared a home above the shop, and Jane had indeed been learning the art of dressmaking while contributing her business acumen. You'll stay with us tonight, of course, Jane told Julian. There's plenty of room and we have so much to catch up on. And you'll come to the ranch tomorrow, Elizabeth said to Ethan. It's only an hour's ride west of the city. That evening, after a joyful dinner filled with conversation and laughter, Ethan prepared to leave for a hotel. Julian walked with him to the door, suddenly reluctant to see him go. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. Ethan took her hand gently. I'm glad I was there by the river that day. Will I see you again? The question slipped out before she could stop it. I hope so. His eyes held hers, warm and sincere. I'll be at the ranch for the foreseeable future. Perhaps you could visit when you're settled. I'd like that, Julian replied, meaning it more than she could express. After he left, Jane cornered her sister with undisguised curiosity. There's more between you and that cowboy than you're telling, isn't there? We barely know each other, Julian protested. Yet he risked his life to help you escape Frank, Jane pointed out, and the way he looks at you. How does he look at me? Jane smiled. Like you're something precious he's afraid to hope for. Julian slept little that night, her mind full of possibilities she hadn't dared consider before. In the morning, she made a decision. I want to go with you to visit Ethan's ranch, she told Elizabeth as they prepared breakfast. Elizabeth's eyes twinkled knowingly. I thought you might. We can ride out this afternoon if you like. Ethan's ranch was modest but well kept, situated in rolling hills with a view of the American River in the distance. The cabin he had built was solid and surprisingly spacious, with a wide porch and windows that caught the western light. He was visibly surprised to see Julian accompanying his sister, but recovered quickly, offering a tour of the property with undisguised pride. It's not much compared to some spreads, he admitted as they walked toward a corral where several horses grazed, but it's good land with plenty of water and room to grow. It's beautiful, Julian said sincerely. You've built something wonderful here. While Elizabeth went inside to prepare coffee, Ethan and Julian stood by the corral fence, watching a mare and her foal. What will you do now in Sacramento? Ethan asked after a comfortable silence. Jane has offered me a place in the business. Apparently my skill with numbers is exactly what they need. Julian turned to face him directly, but I've been thinking about other possibilities too. What kind of possibilities? Julian gathered her courage. When I left Frank, I thought I was just escaping something terrible. I didn't realize I might be moving towards something good. Ethan's expression softened. Julian. I know it's sudden, she continued quickly. We barely know each other, but these past days I've felt more alive, more myself than I have in years, and a large part of that is because of you. Ethan took her hand gently. I've been thinking, too, about coincidences that might not be coincidences at all, about finding you by that river. What conclusions have you reached? She asked, her heart beating faster. That some journeys are meant to be taken together. His voice was low, sincere. I'm not asking for promises, Julian, just a chance to see where this path might lead. Instead of answering with words, Julian stepped closer and kissed him softly. It was a tentative kiss, gentle and questioning, but it held the promise of deeper feelings, of possibilities neither had dared voice yet. When they broke apart, Ethan's smile was radiant. "I'll take that as a yes." From the cabin porch, Elizabeth watched them with satisfaction before discreetly stepping back inside to give them privacy. Over the following months, Julianne divided her time between working at her sister's shop in Sacramento and visiting Ethan's ranch. She learned to ride properly, to appreciate the rhythms of ranch life, to see the beauty in wide, open spaces after years of feeling confined. Ethan courted her with old-fashioned courtesy letters when they were apart, small gifts that showed he paid attention to her preferences, conversations that ranged from practical matters to dreams for the future. There was no pressure, no rush, just a deepening connection that felt more right with each passing day. By autumn, Julianne had moved permanently to the ranch, staying in a small cabin Elizabeth had previously used when visiting. The arrangement preserved propriety while allowing her and Ethan to build a life together gradually. They were married the following spring, a simple ceremony by the river with Jane, Elizabeth and her husband, and a few friends from neighboring ranches in attendance. Julianne wore a dress Elizabeth had made specially, with no high collar to hide behind, and carried wildflowers gathered that morning. As they spoke their vows, Julianne thought of that day by the Stanislaus River when she had thrown away one life and unwittingly begun another. The gold band Ethan placed on her finger felt nothing like the one she had discarded. It was a symbol not of possession but of partnership, freely chosen and joyfully accepted. Their first years together brought challenges: drought one summer, a harsh winter the next, the ups and downs of the cattle market, but also deep contentment. Ethan's small herd grew, as did his reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. Julianne's skill with numbers and organization helped transform the operation from a struggling homestead to a prosperous small ranch. In their third year of marriage, their son William was born, followed 2 years later by daughter Eleanor. The cabin expanded with the family, Ethan adding rooms with the help of neighbors in the traditional way of the frontier. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Ethan took Julianne riding to a hilltop overlooking the ranch. The land below them was transformed from the modest holding she had first seen: new fences marking expanded boundaries, a larger barn, fields of hay for winter feed, a small orchard beginning to bear fruit. "I never imagined any of this," Julianne said as they dismounted to enjoy the view. "When I left Frank, I was just thinking about survival. And now," Ethan asked, taking her hand, "now I think about thriving." She smiled up at him. "About our children growing up strong and free, about growing old with you." Ethan kissed her softly. "Remember what you told me once, about how you thought you were just escaping something terrible, not moving towards something good?" "I remember." "Sometimes the bravest thing isn't facing danger," he said thoughtfully. "It's facing possibility. You did both that day by the river." As they rode back home, where Jane and Elizabeth were watching the children during their anniversary outing, Julianne reflected on how a single moment of desperation had led to a lifetime of joy. The ring she had thrown into the Stanislaus River was long gone, but what it had freed her to find was worth infinitely more: not just escape, but love, not just safety, but happiness, not just a helper, but a partner who had stood beside her when she needed it most, and had never left.